The World of RPGs, Episode 19, Spain, Part 2 of 2. Welcome to The World of RPGs, a podcast in which we travel around the globe and learn about the local role-playing game scenes. I'm your host, Mo Baltz, and in Episode 19, Part 2, we are returning to Spain. So this is the second part, and I'm releasing them at the same time. Go back to Part 1 if you have missed it. It will include the introduction to the country, an overview of the language communities, and a bit about the history of gaming in Spain. In this part, I'm very proud to have had the chance to talk to 3 publishers of role-playing games in Spain, including many English versions of their games too. And yes, this episode is sponsored by H.P. Lovecraft. We start with Shadowlands from Barcelona.
I am Arturo Lozada. I am part of the team of Shadowlands Games, TTRPG Publishing, who's based in Barcelona, Spain. I have been introduced to role-playing games relatively late, when I was in the university, because I have a friend who I had normally play computer games with. Both of us are fans of Baldur's Gate, the first one. And he asked me about, you never trying tabletop role-playing games? I said, no, I heard about them, but I have never been with something who knows how to play. I said, okay, let me show you a game. So we played a session of the old Lord of the Rings game, the Middle-earth role-playing, and it was totally awful, terrible. We've been killed by wolves less than an hour into play, but somehow that lit a spark in my brain. I said, okay, this didn't do well, but this has potential. So I tried again, and I finally get hooked with Vampire the Masquerade. This second edition was the year about 2002, I think. And since then, since the last 20 years, I keep playing. I never had a pause and a hiatus. I'm usually game mastering now, but I'm running my own Dracula dossier. But I have my try in the other side of this gaming screen. And I hope I keep playing to the Asylum, at least.
Do you play any Spanish games?
There's a game in Shadowlands catalog. We are starting to publish in English. It's called the Stirpe de Danwitz. Stirpe of Danitz is based in the Lovecraft tale of the horror from Danitz, I think. It's the original title. It's a very simple gaming system with a solid basis, but with a lot of potential. It has some similarities to the Barbarians of Lemuria system, everyone system. And it also has maybe quite similarity with Free Elegance Year Zero system. You build a pool of D6s and you count your successes. But they have a very interesting mechanic about how you can use those extra successes to pass dice from your partners to support other players, or you can keep the successes to use them in a future role to make your life easier. I'm using this system in several games right now, and I'm quite in love with it. Very soon, you can try them in English with games The Winter King from Shadowlands Games, with this Arthurian dystopy, an alternative universe based in the King Arthur myths. The main data is hard about Mordred has survived the last battle of Canaan versus King Arthur, and now Mordred is the Winter King of Britain. So it's like Midnight meets Excalibur, something like that. There's a free quick start guide already available, and the final game will be ready probably early 2025.
Before we go into more details concerning some games, maybe you can say a bit more about Shadowlands. So how was this company founded and what's your role there?
Shadowlands Games was founded in 2019 by 2 partners, Fran Valverde and Joaquin Marquez. Those guys have very solid experience in the company world, have worked previously for constructions and insurance companies, but both of them also share a deep love for role-playing games and tabletop games. So they tried a chance of career. And their first idea was funding an online web shop specialized in tabletop games. But they met the third partner, the third pillar of this company, who's on the side, Marlock, who's a very talented illustrator and also a veteran of role-playing games. And they contact Marlock to try to establish a collaboration. But they start talking, and the idea of the shops soon get bigger. And they say, okay, let's try to publish our own TTRPGs. And since 2019, they started publishing. The first book we launched was Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition Scenario, a campaign deeply inspired by the old setting of D&D in a post-apocalyptic world, a desert. The name is evading me right now. You know what we're talking about? That's what with the slaves in a desert world in which the halflings are cannibals.
Dark Sun?
Yeah, Dark Sun. They've been inspired by Dark Sun, but actualized. It calls Destined to the Bellow of the Beast. It was well, but then they tried with a Call of Cthulhu scenario called Science of Subneu Rat, and it's really established the tone of the company. My role there, I'm a PR. I'm responsible for social media mainly. I'm also do my part on demonstrating games and doing testing, proofreading, and so on. I'm a journalist by career, so I'm a bit of a jack of all trades regarding my part of the company. Since the pandemic, since 2020, the company was forced to heavily invest on online play, like everyone else. And making that problem into an opportunity, we created an online group based mostly in Telegram. We have a Telegram community with 1,500 people, very active. And here they discuss the games, and we organize gaming demonstrations, gaming groups. We share resources. And since past year, since 2023, we are publishing our first products directly for the English market. We have one game already in the USA retail store. It was Raven, a narrative game based in Edgar Allan Poe's universe and stories. And there's two more coming next year. One of the Winter King, which I already talked about, and the other is Kingsmouth. Kingsmouth is a D&D setting with a very grimdark and Lovecraftian vibe. So you are living in a land devastated by the Cthulhu mythos, and you are trying to survive there.
Yes, from the publications you have in Spanish too, I see there are lots of Lovecraftian things like King in Yellow, Trail of Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu. And then you also mentioned this game, which is going to be translated, Estirpe de Dunwich.
Estirpe de Dunwich, yeah, the Cthulhu has a heavy influence in Shadowlands games. We found our dark path with him. There was two main milestones for the company in this 5 years of existence. One is signing an agreement with Chaosium, who allows us to publish our own Call of Cthulhu scenarios. So we have quite a few in Spanish right now, about 20. We are starting to translate them in English because we think we managed to difference us for the typical Cthulhu campaign, the fighting a sect of Nyarlathotep followers and so on. We are heavily investing in contemporary, modern time campaigns, and we are exploring topics and genres that you cannot usually find in your standard Call of Cthulhu game. And the other milestone was becoming the official Spanish publisher for Pelgrane Press products. So we have our own edition of Dracula Dossier and The Yellow King and The Esoterrorist, many other games from Pelgrane to come, which is a company we really admire and we really look into.
Yes, and for the listeners, because I started talking about Trail of Cthulhu in the China episode when I talked to the Chinese translator of Trail of Cthulhu, I'm still reading the supplements in English as PDFs. I have never played it, but I'm still investigating in the game. But if you have these translations into Spanish and your own Call of Cthulhu adventures, are these localized? So do they take place in Spain or do they have any specific Spanish components?
No, we usually don't localize our translation. We keep them in the original setting, but we have our own line of products of Spanish Cthulhu. We have a line of books called Piel de Toro, Bull Skin, written by Ricardo Ibanez, who's the author of the very first Spanish role-playing game ever published, who's called Aquelarre. It's a game about playing in medieval Spain around 12th century, more or less. And he also wrote a supplement to set Call of Cthulhu in 1920s Spain. So Ricard is a historian by trade. He's a history teacher. So he has a deep knowledge about the setting. And following those first book in 1920s, we already published a second book of Piel de Toro in 1936 during Spanish Civil War. It was a terrible time, but very fit to set there your own horror stories. And we have a third book coming, Piel de Toro 1970s, during the time Spain shifted his form of governance for the Franco dictatorships to democracy. Also very violent and dark times here in the country. Besides Piel de Toro, we have a few adventures, a few scenarios setting in Spain. The last coming is Trail of Cthulhu scenario called A Crown of Flowers, Una Corona de Flores, which is set in the frontier area between Spain and France, in the Pyrenees Mountains. And it's a modern day story, quite a Spanish version of True Detective, a dark investigation in which you really have trouble separating the dreams and the reality. What's in your mind and what is a real supernatural danger. Now we have more stories because one trademark thing of Shadowlands games is we have our own Patreon-like system we call the Shadow Shot subscription, that we have a few hundred people subscribe to our monthly one-shot line. If you subscribe, you receive 4 adventures, 4 short adventures a month to play, and several of those are also set in Spain. We have that for Call of Cthulhu, and even have one set in Spain by the Troubleshooters, which is a Swedish game. We also translate, based in all Franco-Belgian comics. I think you talk about that game in your German episode.
Yes, I saw a copy when I visited Germany in May.
It's a really good game.
Not my genre, but yeah, it looks nice. So we talked a bit about this Estirpe de Dunwich. What makes that game different to Trail of Cthulhu or the original Call of Cthulhu game, except the rules?
It's a Lovecraftian game where we completely shift the focus. In this game, you are not investigators trying to unveil a dark mystery. In this game, you are people yourself marked by the Cthulhu mythos. You are descendant of Joshua Todd. You have some how being the exactly how it depends on every gaming table. We are leaving that open for you to give your own answer. But the actual thing is you have strange powers because you have been marked by Jog sort of. Quite similar that we can read in The Horror of Dunwich, short story from Lovecraft, And you have strange powers, and you are not a superhero. You have minor powers or minor effects, but maybe you can harden your skin, or you can grow tentacles from your body, or you can read minds, or immediately alter the thinking and the feelings of other people. You have a wider range of powers to define. So you somehow a creature of the mythos yourself, and you live in a shadow world in which you use in your day-to-day life. You deal with ghouls and you deal with deep ones. So it's like an urban fantasy game, but with set it on the Cthulhu mythos. So you can play as a monster for a time, and your main goal here is to survive and to know more about your own condition. And you have always risk because you abuse your power and you get too close to Yog-Sothoth, you disappear from this world and you get absorbed in the essence of the greater world. You lose your character, of course. So it's Cthulhu Mythos, but with a completely different lens.
Okay, that sounds fascinating. And I'm looking forward to the English translation.
Probably our most successful game by now is Raven, which already referred the first time. What is he has his own system, really close to PBTA, to Powered by the Apocalypse, but it's with a shift to be more similar to post-narrative. No, you have all the dice rolls and all the character abilities are close to narrative twists and turning points. And so on is you play there in the city of Raven, which is an original setting. But I can describe it like it's the place in which all post short stories have place. It's a city surrounded by the deep mist, haunted by ghosts, in which you play as the member of a cursed family. With your own dark powers, you are in close vigilance of a magical order who suspect you are practicing dark arts and endangering all the city, like your previous members of the family have done in the past. So it's a game about gothic horror, about family relationship, about dangerous love and ghosts, and exploring the world beyond the grave. Very Edgar Allan Poe. And like I said, it's our first actually published game in English. We are distributing it right now in the USA, and we hope to publish them in other European countries through partnerships with local publishers. There's a French edition already on its way, and we're negotiating more. And if you like gothic vibes and if you like pop, you probably would like this game.
I just remember I saw the Kickstarter when it was live.
I haven't said it out loud, but one signature of Shadowlands game is we really like our books to be beautiful. We put much importance in the art and in the edition and in the design of our books and our games. You buy a book from Shadowlands Games, you have a beautiful object besides having a good game. And Raven, I think, is a good example of that, especially the Kickstarter edition with a box set, with tarot deck and custom dice and your own maps of the city. Is something we try to do in every book we publish. We like our books to be books of art besides role-playing games. Part of the good reception Raven has is because of this, because it's a very beautiful product and easy to read and easy to play.
I looked at the covers on your Spanish and English websites, and they do look really beautiful. And it would be great if all publishers would have that great art, because it's really amazing. I've seen 2 more Spanish games on your website, which I want to ask about. Okay, as I said, I don't know Spanish, but Rojo?
And Rojo is red. Rojo is an strange beats. It's a game based in a series of novels published by the Spanish author Carlos Cisi, which depicts a post-apocalyptic world in a vampiric plague was almost erased all humanity. It's a book trilogy, so we know the author, we have common friends. He approached us, he's also a fan of role-playing games. Okay, I think we can make a role-playing game about with the story, and say, okay, let's try. And this use Everyone system. It's like a Barbarians of Lemuria spin-off. And it puts you in the skin of a survivor to this vampiric plague, trying to live another day, to not become a slave of the vampires or simply a bag of food. We have a few scenarios published to expand that game, but it was an experiment which sadly have not very good reception here. It's a good game, I think, but it didn't have a very good reception in the Spanish market, so it's a project put on hold by now. But simply by now, maybe we have some ideas for a campaign and so on. But let's see what the future brings. And probably an overall sincerity, right? But it's like it was an experiment, an experimental game. So let's try to bring readers, fantasy readers, to the role-playing games. But I have mixed feeling about that. I think it's a good opportunity and a good game, especially if you like survival horror. We have to, rethink that project to be for the future.
Okay, the second one I found is this one.
Yeah, Robota was our first original game and was a jewel. So this is designed to be a standalone game. It's written by one of the most popular role players on YouTube's and role player theories of Spain. It's a guy called Sirio Sesenra. If you speak Spanish, I cannot recommend more you follow his YouTube channels because you have a lot of original games and a good role-playing advice there. And it was a game he built from scratch with a deep original science fiction setting. You are playing in real Earth, but a few 100,000 years in the future, time enough for humanity become extinct, but not time enough for the continent change its shape. So you are playing in a world you really know. You can use Google Maps to play Robota, but in a complete different society and world. It's a world taken over by machines, by Syrian robots called Robota. We have different models and different families and different politics. It's a world also slowly becoming invaded by a giant fungus plague in which the Robota civilization have to fight this way to contain this fungus advancement. And yeah, there are humans on Robota, but they are sleeping in big archaeology cities, closed secure space, put it in. There's 1,000 people there simply sleeping, simply in ecstasy. And it's a mystery. What are they doing there? No robot knows was the final destiny for humanity, and it's your mission to discover it playing Robota. It's really a very deeply original game, and if you like science fiction and if you like solar punk and this kind of genre, I cannot recommend you Robota more. And speaking of original system, we also have two small games. We can talk about them as you want. Those are small narrative games. One of them is called Ocho Lanzas, Eight Spears, and it's a game developed from the Cthulhu Dark system. Also Trophy Dark and so kind of games. It's a really quick and simple system, but powerful to show your descent into darkness, but it's set in a mythical Japan or an Asian country of your own choice. But the selling point of this game is you are part of the Eight Spears, which is a secret organization fighting demons in these Asian settings. And you accuse yourself, you are slowly descending into darkness, which have just some powers, but also is that penalty. So you're trying to do the best you can do with your remaining time, joining other people, because like you, I'm fighting demons, I'm protecting peasants, and living dark adventures in this Japan. It's a really quick to play game. You can read it and set a game for this very evening if you want. It's a play to lose game, so you have to get the correct mindset to play it. But if you like Japanese legends, Japanese lore, and you like dark stories, you probably enjoy Eight Spears. And the other one is called Enemigos Íntimos, Intimate Enemies, in a road translation. And it's a pure narrative game with no master, in which you and your friends tell the stories of two characters, one protagonist and one antagonist. And you use the dice to set narrative turns, milestone in the lives of those two characters. And in a quick play, you can tell a full story in one session. you accompany them, discover what their story is about. It's a game with no setting. You decide with what you want to play before starting. Quite different, like Microscope, for example. I was like, okay, let's tell a story of a cowboy and an outlaw fighting for their lives in Nevada desert. Or okay, let's tell a story of a bounty hunter and an alien terrorist in a distant future in another solar system. Or whatever you want. If you have an antagonist and a protagonist, you can tell your own story with intimate enemies.
Okay, and the last game I found, which I think was just crowdfunded, is Tricarion. Is that right?
Tricarion is a work in progress right now. It's a game we'll launch in English and in Spanish at the same time. Its version is inspired by the board game of the same name, Tricarion Lands of Illusion. It's a game from a Polish company, from a Polish publisher, Malcast Games. And it's a very hard Euro game, one of these with very thick rules, excellent game, very funny. But it has an interest and well-developed setting, so we thought it's good material for our role-playing game. So we contacted the original company and they give us permission to design this TTRPG based in Tricarion. Tricarion is like playing magicians, classic magicians. If you have watched The Prestige, the movie from Christopher Nolan, something like that. But it's set in a fictional city, the city of Magoria, in which the magic and the magician are the main export product and the main attractive. So we put you in front of a magician company. You are an experienced magician trying to carve your reputation and your way into this highly competitive. And you have also survived the underworld of the city. You can live stories like maybe Guns of New York or Peaky Blinders, because being a magician is being a really important person in the city. Magicians, the use of magic, because you are mainly using magician tricks and illusions, but there's also real magic. You are starting to discover to the use of the proverbial Tricarion stone. So that's real magic, and the technology the city and the scientists are developing using Tricarion plays a key role in Magoria. And only the magicians with his deep training are prepared to unveil the secrets of the Tricarion. So there will be a lot of factions and a lot of shady characters that will probably try to convince you to join them. So you have to become a great magician, you have to manage a successful magician company, and you have to survive, and you have to rob, and you have to weave your own dark plots, probably. It's a game that also used the STIRP system.
But you have translated like the Trail of Cthulhu and Call of Cthulhu material into Spanish, and now you're also starting translating your own material into English. Were there any problems in the translation?
I don't go as far as problems, but yeah, there's some funny difference between translation. Quick fact, is really more expensive to translate from Spanish to English than the other way around, because there's a lot of demand here for people translating to English into Spanish, but the other way is not so popular. So it's hard to find a good translator. Because you have an English native with some writing skills, you have natural text translated from Spanish. But we managed to find a small team of good translators, and right now we have a very well functioning machine, I think, with our last translations. Like I previously said, we have a few quick start guides you can download from our English site, shadowlandsgames.com. You can try either free quick start guides for the Winter King or free Call of Cthulhu scenario called Nathan's Lot. This one is set in Massachusetts. We have a very good feedback from English native speakers who read these scenarios and this quick start guide. Besides having some peculiar terms, especially with Kismouth. Kismouth was a setting with a heavy inspiration for the Spanish gold century, we call it the 16th century. That time Spanish has a vast empire which covers most of South America, but it's starting to decline. No? So it was the century was the Quixote was right, for example. It's like a very historical period that is very engraved, very interiorized by all Spanish people. And the Spanish, the language used there, has some peculiar style, no? Quite when you try to write in medieval English. And Kismouth was written trying to mimic that language. There are some peculiar Spanish words that we have to work hard to find an English equivalent. But Kismouth's PDF already available for our Kickstarter's backers to download, and we are receiving good feedback so on. So I suppose we complete this quest to translate Siglo de Oro Spanish into an English you can read without problem.
Speaking of languages, so you're based in Barcelona, which is in the Catalan-speaking region. And I saw in your catalog, you also have some Cthulhu material in Catalan, don't you?
Yep, we have previously signing this license with Chaosium. We were using as the air version of the Call of Cthulhu system. It calls Cthulhu D100. It's an open rule set. Okay, you can download it right now from our website. And we did a Catalonian version of that game with collaboration with some local players, because there's a really nice market, a really nice community of Catalonian-speaking role players. We have even some events in which you're playing only in Catalonian, and we are really exploring more future books and future publishing in Catalonian. But by now, I cannot tell you more because we are negotiating these possibilities. But yeah, we really want to keep going that way. Going to the peculiarities, gimmicks of Spain is we have several languages which widely spoken. I'm working for Shadowlands, but I'm not living in Barcelona. I live in A Coruña, which is in the other coast of Spain. I work online, work back home. And here we speak Galego, which is also a Latin language, closer to Portuguese maybe. And there's Basque, which is his own beast. Basque is a very beautiful language, but no relation at all with any other European language. It's like a Selacanthus of language.
My last question is, you said you have a podcast also on the website. Can you say a bit about that?
One of our main interests here in Shadowlands Games is to get more people into the role-playing game hobby. Because for two reasons. The first one and the main one is we are role-playing games lovers, so we want more people to discover this wonderful hobby. The second reason, the materialist one, if more players, it means more books sold. Okay, so we work hard really to build our own community. We have that Telegram group we spoke before, and we also have a long-running podcast in Spanish called Charlas desde Shadowlands. You can find it in Spotify and in iVoox and iTunes and in our own website. We release an episode every weekday from Monday to Fridays, and we have more than 1,000 episodes published right now. And it's a variety show around role-playing games. We have interviews, we have role-playing advice, we have actual plays, we have demonstrations, we talk about gaming design, and we talk about everything related to role-playing games. So if you are a Spanish speaker and you like role-playing, you probably find something you like in Charlas desde Shadowlands.
Next, we hear from Other Cells, an indie publisher.
My name is Rodrigo García Carmona, and I have done many things related to role-playing games. I have written and published my own game and some supplements and other work. I have worked for Spanish and American companies. And I have also translated a lot of RPGs, both for my own company, Other Cells, and also for other people. And like D&D, for instance, that's the most popular thing that I have translated, the 5th edition of D&D, for Edge Entertainment, which is part of Asmodee. I got into role-playing games in the early 90s when I was 12, I think, and I was given by my mother a copy of El Señor de los Anillos, which is the Spanish version of Middle-earth role-playing, the red book, which she bought at a big store, and I couldn't make heads or tails about this book or how this game was supposed to work. But when I realized the power of role-playing games and the things that you could do with that, I was hooked, and I never stopped playing. In my whole life, I have had other hobbies that I have taken and left, but role-playing games is the only thing that I have been doing non-stop since I discovered it.
Then the next question is, which games are you currently playing?
Currently I'm playing Delta Green a lot lately. The last game that I have played is Mothership. I am playing Against the Dark Master. And what else? These days I play Call of Cthulhu a lot. I'm in an investigative mood lately.
Well, you can't go wrong with Call of Cthulhu. But you said you work for a Spanish company. Can you maybe say a little bit about them? How were they founded and what kind of games do they have?
Okay, I work for this company called Edge Entertainment, which has been publishing role-playing games since the, I think, very late 90s or early 2000s in Spain. And they grew and they eventually become part of Asmodee. They contacted me to ask if I was interested in doing the localization for the Spanish edition of the 5th edition of D&D. And of course I was flabbergasted and I was very happy to take that job, because even if Dungeons & Dragons is not my favorite game, it's a huge and important game, and I love the 5th edition already. They found me, I cannot be 100% sure about this, because somebody got my number and called me, and I think it was because they saw that I have been publishing and translating role-playing games with my own company, and I am one of the authors of a book for D&D 5 in English, which is the Tome of Beasts, published by Cover Press, which was eventually translated into Spanish, but at that time that was only in English. And I think that book made them think that I understood the rules and the nuances of D&D, and also that I knew the language, I suppose.
When translating Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, were there any challenges when getting it into Spanish, perhaps with, I don't know, gendered language or monster names, which are difficult to write in Spanish? Anything?
Specific to the language or to this particular work?
Were there any problems with the translation into Spanish of D&D?
I think I can tell you all of this now, since now the translation is in-house in Wizards of the Coast and they have a new edition on the way. But we had a lot of problems with monster names and names of the places. We want to translate everything in a consistent way. Okay, so if we translate the names of the places, we translate the name of every place. For instance, you have this city, which is Baldur's Gate, and that clearly means Puerta de Baldur in Spanish. And then we have Waterdeep, for instance. And the thing is that the people at Wizards of the Coast, they wanted to have some names which are trademark or important for their IP, not translated. So we have things like Waterdeep, or even concepts, not only places like Underdark, for instance. They want that to stay in English. So we had the whole book translated into Spanish, but some places, some specific words were left in English. And this was something that we tried to negotiate with them, but we couldn't manage to get what we wanted to do across. So in the end, we had this, and it's one of the things that I like the less about this job, that we had to leave these words in English, which made no sense, really. They also wanted to supervise every translation of every monster or race, species, lineages, whatever you want to call them, or other creatures. And the thing is that in Spain, we had a tradition of translated previous versions of D&D into our language. Sometimes different editions use different words from the same thing. For instance, the ranger sometimes is an explorador, some other times is guardabosques, but some monsters had some specific translations that were like that since the second edition, which was the first one that was published in Spanish. And they were second guessing all our choices of names for monsters. And sometimes we needed to go to Wikipedia or look for a source in English that said that this was the appropriate Spanish word for this kind of creature because it was part of the Spanish mythology, some things like trasgo for goblinoids and things like that. And I think because they told us that they had a Spanish speaker there reviewing what we wrote, and sometimes the comments that this person made me think that Spanish was their second language, or maybe he was from Mexico or Cuba or Puerto Rico, probably Puerto Rico or someplace like that, in which Spanish is their first language, but they have a lot of words in English. And one of the problems, the drawbacks of this approach is that we were translated for the Spanish market. And I don't mean the Spanish-speaking market, but for the people that play D&D in Spain. And in Spain and in Latin America, we speak sometimes different versions of Spanish. It's not as different as the Portuguese from Portugal and from Brazil, because we have the Real Academia, which tries to unify the Spanish of all countries, but sometimes the words have different meanings. One thing that might sound strange is that one common word in the Spanish of Spain, which is coger, grab, or pick something up, might be understood as a sexual reference in some countries of Latin America. So we try to avoid this word. There are some figures of speech. We need to translate some texts that were written in a colloquial way, but we needed to use a colloquial way that was familiar to somebody in Spain and things like that. I think this was the most difficult thing for us. There were other problems, like the fact that we needed to respect the original layout page by page, and things in Spanish take, 20-30% more space than in English. So the only way that we could do that and maintaining the layout is by decreasing the font size, which made things difficult to read, things like that. I hope I have answered your question. This was the most difficult thing for us relative to the fact that we are translating English to Spanish. There were other problems. One of them was related to the size of the text that we had to work with, because we started working on many books at the same time. We had a glossario, this document with the words in English and Spanish. I can't remember the English name for that. Glossary. So it's the same word. A glossary that was monstrous. And the first books sometimes had to be translated in a very short time. So we needed to use several translators at the same time in the same book, which is something that I personally didn't like, but we were forced to do to meet the times that we needed to meet. And that gives some problems when you need to do the proofreading later to make sure that you cannot see the difference between different authors, and sometimes different parts of the document make reference to the same thing, so you need to make the glossary even bigger, because everything that would appear in a different part of the book, which is important mechanically or lore-wise to the book, needs to be put there. And in the end, I think I supervised like 7 or 8 translators at the same time. It was difficult for me because I was not used to doing that. Because for the first 3 core books, the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual, 3 people were the translators of that. But they liked the job that I did, and I started to coordinate more and translate less, which is not something that I like. I like translating more than managing people, but that was the job. And at one moment, my job turned more into managing people than actually translating any text. I only proofread what other people translated, and at this time I decided to call it quits. So I stopped working on D&D around this time. But Around this time, Wizards of the Coast revoked the license for their different licensees. So it was roughly the same time at which we stopped publishing D&D. So people might think that I left at that time, but I left slightly earlier than that for reasons unrelated to that. And now that I'm talking about this, one of the things that give me more sadness is that we had several books translated that we couldn't publish. They were ready to go. Some of them were almost in layout, but we couldn't publish them because the license was revoked. Very good books.
By the way, that was interesting that Spanish is longer than English because German has the same problem. For example, the Game of Thrones books in German are 2 books each. So each volume of Game of Thrones or The Song of Ice and Fire is 2 books in German.
We have the same here. I have my copy of Game of Thrones here in 2 books.
I interviewed some publishers in Germany who translate indie games like DCC, and they had the same problem with changing the layout or having smaller font. And one guy in an interview said, well, as I can see, all of us are wearing glasses and we don't want smaller font, so we have to change the layout.
But now that you talk about DCC, sorry for interrupting you, because my company publishes DCC. But in this case, Joseph Goodman was understanding of our situation and allow us to do our own layout with different numbers of pages if needed. And that was great. I really never understood the need to be equal to the English version page by page. I understand that if by production reasons you use different layers, because if you want to publish a book for multiple languages, you can do the part that is common for all of them and then do the text for each language. And if you produce all the books at the same time, that's not as uncommon a strategy. But when you have books that are published with months or years of difference, I don't see the point about that.
Actually, I wanted to ask you about Other Selves. So what do you do in that company and what kinds of games do you have there?
Okay, what I do, I'm jack of all trades because we are 3 people and we do this on our free time during the evenings and weekends because we love role-playing games. And we are lucky because we have this hobby, which is publishing games, and we earn more money than we lose. So it's a money-earning hobby, but doesn't cover the amount of time that we put on it. And the games that we publish, if you have talked with other publishers, they will give you a very different answer. Precisely because this is something that we do on our free time, we have the luxury of publishing whatever we want, whenever we want. So we decide when something is ready and we publish it. We don't need to produce, 1 book a month or 1 book every 2 months or so to pay salaries. And that makes us incredibly happy. We publish the books that we find personally interesting and we can get the license, of course. For instance, we published recently Against the Dark Master. That's game very similar to the old Middle-earth role-playing. We call it an improved version of that game, and we publish it because we love that game, as I told you before. Also, Dungeon Crawl Classics is something that the 2 other members of this tripartite love. They were the first Spanish people to publish material for this game in English. And we also personally love Japanese role-playing games, so we have published a couple of them. We have published Ryutama and Tenra Bansho Zero, and some other games that we personally have created.
These 2 Japanese games, are they translated from Japanese or from English?
No, we translated them from English because the amount of money that you need to pay a Japanese to Spanish translator is much bigger than an English to a Spanish translator, plus the license of the English translation. So we translated it from English.
You also have some original Spanish games. Maybe you can say a bit about them.
Yes. The first one that we publish is La Puerta de Istar, The Gate of Istar. It's a fantasy game, but instead of being inspired in the traditional Western fantasy of medieval knights, or even the Western ancient fantasy based on Rome, Greece, and so on, it's based on the legends and myths and history of Mesopotamia, the Near Eastern, what is actually Iraq. because I personally love that place, its history, its legends, and I wanted to make a game about that is very sword and sorcery, because the connections that this kind of war evokes in my imagination with Conan, for instance, or other pulp stories is very strong. After that, we published Ablaneda, which I think is going to be the most difficult to explain to an outsider, to somebody from outside Spain, because it's a medieval game set in a part of Spain that has been separated by from the rest of the world by a fog. Here you have a mixture of the Night Watch of Game of Thrones, for instance, because those are people that protect small villages and do jobs for the people that live in this isolated area. Cross with Guardia Civil, which is kind of the National Guard here in Spain. It's a very black humor game because all the characters are condemned to death and they are given the alternative. Instead of being hung, they could do services to their community. And it's very black humor in which all life is miserable and they have to fight against monsters like Cyclops or giant serpents with only their wits. It has this original magic system in which you need to do a rhyme, and depending on the rhyme, you throw some dice, and the game master decides on the effects of that particular rhyme. I love this game. And finally, we have published Máscaras del Imperio, Masks of the Empire, which is set in what we call in Spain the Golden Century, which was the century in which the Spanish Empire was at its highest, but also in the century in which we have the best, probably, or the most famous cultural productions, books, theater, paintings from Spain. And is this century seen through the lens of 1940s comics and mask Avengers. The player characters of this game are people that don a mask and fight for the common people of the empire against the big enemies, but also against the abuses of the church or the government. And all of that set in a world in which magic is real. We have clockwork punk technology. I hope the reference is clear here. It's like a steampunk, but with clockwork mechanism and so on. Since it's a pulp setting, instead of the evil Nazis, which is the typical ones, we have the East India Company from the Netherlands. Sorry if there's somebody from the Netherlands giving this. And these are the games that we have published in Spanish. But when we bring a game to Spain, when we translate it, we also try to negotiate the license to produce original materials. For instance, we have produced 2 supplements, 2 books of adventures for Ryutama, and we are currently working on a campaign for Against the Dark Master, and we have several books in Spanish for Dungeon Crawl Classics, because we want to, even if we publish foreign games, we try to also produce some local material for them.
Okay, that sounds awesome. So these localized supplements, are they about Spanish topics, or do they touch on Spanish subjects, or is it just that you wanted to write a supplement?
It's very interesting that you say this, because our line that you ask this, because our line of supplements for Dungeon Crawl Classics is called Rural Fantasy. And it tries to represent the rural environment in Spain with these small insular towns, with these shepherds and all that. And it has a lot of jokes that this material is also published in English, by the way, but I think most of the jokes are going to be funnier if you are from Spain or from a country that is Mediterranean, are very similar. I don't know, maybe in France, Italy, North Africa, they share similar sensitivities. But for instance, we have an adventure which starts with people looking for the biggest pig of the town, which has been stolen. Another in which all the characters are women from a small town that discover that all the men of the town went to a circus to find some fun, and they had some problems. I don't want to spoil it, but we try this fantasy to be very Spanish-like. A word that we use, which is cutre, which probably, in English, at least for the Americans, the most similar thing would be a redneck. Okay? So these uncultured people from small towns and so on. That for Dungeon Crawl Classics. For Ryutama, what we produce, I think, is more universal because the people that wrote for this game love the anime influences of it and try to play to this kind of mood. But one writes about what one knows. For instance, I wrote one of the adventures that we have published for Ryutama, and it was set in a university in which if you work or spend a lot of time at university, you will see a lot of things that will bring a smile to your face, I think.
And just to get that clear, the Dungeon Crawl Classics adventures are also translated into English then?
Yes, they are called the Phlogiston books, and you can look for them in Drive-Thru RPG. They are available to buy just in PDF or also in print on demand. This is because the license for Dungeon Crawl Classics that Joseph Goodman gave us allowed us to publish what we want in Spanish, but we also must provide an English version because he wants to read it and enjoy it too.
That's a good idea for a license, because I always find it fascinating when there are like local supplements in different countries, and not many countries can pull that off. But then I always want to know what's written in there. And if I don't speak French, for example, then it's a problem because I will never know. And that's the reason I started the podcast. I wanted to know what's in those books because, for example, there are World of Darkness supplements that are only available in German, older ones. Of course, I can read German, but it's an interesting thing that there's sometimes these localized versions.
Yes, I also agree that those are very interesting because you can see the culture of the place in those books. I was doing a research stay in Finland, for instance, and I picked up several books that were in Finnish. I needed to use a translator app to read what was there, but I enjoyed just looking at them. And of course, in Japan, they are the kings of that. They have a lot of supplements that I would love to read because my Japanese is very basic. I need dictionary for everything and I cannot read it fluently. But I'm also very interested in what other countries are producing.
Is there anything you want to add before I stop the recording?
You have talked with other people in Spain, so probably they have already told you this, but some aspects that are interesting here is that I think we have a lot of influence of French games here, because many people that started gaming here in Spain were from Catalonia and they got English and French books. And also that most people, but you probably already know that most people here didn't start with D&D but with other games.
Do you know which games and why?
In Spain, the first, I will need to check on this, but I believe the first role-playing game that was published was the Redbots, the D&D Redbots. But it was not very widespread. And after that, we had to wait some time until another company started to publish, to import some games into Spain. And they started with Chaosium games and with Iron Crown Enterprises games. We got RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu, which is huge in Spain. Call of Cthulhu, probably because of that. Middle-earth role-playing, Star Wars The Seeds. Later, we got AD&D, but I think most of us didn't start playing, not even fantasy, with D&D. We probably started with RuneQuest or with Middle-earth role-playing, because those were what this company published in Spain. And Call of Cthulhu, of course. I cannot overstate how important is Call of Cthulhu in Spain. When I was working in the Spanish version of D&D, D&D was the best-selling game, but Call of Cthulhu was clearly second.
Last but not least, No Soldorol from Madrid.
My name is Pedro J. Ramos. I'm from No Rol Ediciones, and I've been playing role-playing games since I was a child in the school, because the brother of one of my friends discovered the role-playing games. One weekend, I go to their house, and I have the opportunity to play with them, and I love role-playing games. Since a child, I have playing games for nearly 30 years or something, yeah. And in the last 15 years, I have the opportunity to write and publish my own games or translate other games in No Solo Roll.
What game was it you started with?
This is a strange question because the brother of my friend probably plays Dungeons and Dragons, but the game that they used to show ourselves what is role-playing games is one that he invented more or less through playing. You must have a strange score. Play with a dice and this is your strange score. Things like that. Their own game. I spent 1 year or something to discover that are published games.
So you talked about No Solo Roll. Can you maybe say a bit about that company, where it is and how it was founded and what they do?
No Solo Roll, that can be translated as not only role-playing games, but probably role-playing games, because it's the most usual thing that we publish. We have also some novels, some board games, but mainly role-playing games. It has been founded around 15 years, but previously it's a website with news about role-playing games and about scenarios, ideas for new games. And when the website is closed by Manuel Sueiro, the founder of No Solo Roll, they begin to publish his own games. And after that, he gathered some partners that, as me, as example, to build a strong publisher and made a way of life from him and others. We are now here. Probably the Spanish community know about us and play something of our games or translated games or own end games. No?
Okay, and when I look at your web shop, which is in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, but I can guess what it is, I see some translations, for example, World of Darkness 20th edition games. There seem to be some Cthulhu-themed ones. I see Blades in the Dark, Iron Kingdoms, Cult, which I got as a 16-year-old at a flea market in Germany, the German translation of first edition. So I have a strong personal connection to it. Mutant Year Zero, Symbaroum, so the Free League games, Seventh Sea. So these would be translated ones. And you have a couple of original Spanish games. So maybe we start with these original Spanish games first. And I would guess the most famous one is Aquelarre.
Yeah, Aquelarre is probably the most famous role-playing game in Spain because it's the first one. It has been published in the 90s by Ricard Ibáñez. And we are now publishing the third edition. And in the end of the year, we are launched the fourth edition, developed by the own Ricard Ibáñez and Antonio Polo. That is more or less, he's developing the new edition in terms of rules and things like that. And it's translated into English by Nocturnal Media, the publishers of Pendragon, because the original editor see some things in common, no? In Pendragon, King Arthur Pendragon, and Aquelarre. Aquelarre is developed in Spain in the Middle Ages and combines magic and mites and the historical events. It's probably the most famous game. The system is kind of Call of Cthulhu or Stormbringer and things like that, with percentages. But we have also other less famous but also interesting games. I can speak a little about this. Is it okay for you, Moritz?
The Aquelarre English translation was on Bundle of Holding at the beginning of October, and I got a copy. I just haven't had the time to read it yet, so that's a Spanish game available in English. Okay, but then maybe we can also go on to the other ones you have.
Yeah, continuing with games available in English, we have Blackshot, that is based on the graphic novels by Canales and Garnido, a noir detective game with characters that are some kind of animals, are furries, more or less. We have the opportunity to develop the game and publish in Spanish, and after that we perform a crowdfunding, not so successful in terms that there are a lot of copies involved, but it's available in English with all the materials that are in Spanish, and also Little Monster Detectives, that is called in Spain Pequeños Detectives de Monstruos. That is a game for early childs, a role-playing game that is a mix of role-playing game and also a book to play with your children. Probably this is the three games that we have in English where we are developed directly. But we also have another things more or less related with the English community. As example, if you are aware of Adventure Time series by Cartoon Network, we have developed the first role-playing game about the game that is called in Spain Hora de Aventuras, Adventure Time. We don't have now the rights because we discontinued the line. It has a lot of successful and copies involved, but after the end of the series, the sales got down, of course. And now there are a new version by English community that is going to publish it this year or something like that with a data system, but our version have a known system. The last game that I want to talk related with the English community is Malefic Time, that is based on Luis and Romulo Royo pictures and world. It's a post-apocalyptic world, and we developed the game, the setting, the rules based on its world. We have other games, and I want to talk about at least two, but it's not so knowledge outside Spain.
But actually, the ones who are not translated are also very interested because, as I said, I don't speak Spanish, so it would be interesting to know what else you have. I got the feeling from some of the covers and titles that there are many Cthulhu-related things. Is that right?
Yeah, probably in the two Cthulhu-related games that we have published with a lot of interest from the Spanish community is Amor de Otro Mundo, that may be translated as A Love or A Crash from Another World. It's not published yet, but probably soon. And it's based on an online campaign by a woman that has the most global community in Spain of role-playing games. It's more or less that the theater content most influential in Spanish language, Rea, that is from Valencia in Spain. And her game is based on the idea that mixed the cults and the myths of Cthulhu with love issues. Probably your character is involved with Nyarlathotep or a ghoul or something like that. No? And the game that we have published yet and has a lot of support by the community is Cultos Innombrables, that can be translated as Nameless Cults, as the book of the Lovecraft series, that is based on the idea that is playing in the actual era, and you doesn't in researcher or investigator, you are a cultist, a member of a cult, but not as I'm a bad guy, I kill people for fun. No, you are a man or a woman that want power, and you have an easy way to get it, but the way of gather this power is going to go you to madness or kill you. It's a gray game, more like a heroes versus evil people.
And as I said, you also have quite a number of translated games from English. Are there any adaptations where you have material or supplements that are unique for the Spanish market?
In terms of words, I think that the Spanish translators and the Spanish community of role-playing want to be as closer to the original material as possible. I was thinking about this because you aware me that you are going to ask this, and I only able to remember one game, that is Mutant Year Zero, because in Mutant Year Zero, the food or the drinks are called using slang. I didn't remember what is the spelling in English of this term, but in Spanish, we use for food papeo, that is a word for meal, but not so good meal. I'm going to eat some fries or some snacks. And for drinks, we use lingotazos, that is maybe taking a shot of alcohol, more or less. That I think that there are good translations, because lingotazo, it's early to link to fuel also. And in the game, you can use the lingotazos to drink or to get fuel for your car and things like that. But we also perform some in the translation, mainly for crowdfundings. We have the opportunity to contribute to the games, mainly developed adventures. As example, in the crowdfundings of Mage the Ascension and Changeling the Dreaming, we developed original adventures. One of them settled in Madrid, in Spain, and also for Cult, the third edition, and from 7C, we developed scenarios that are part of the rewards of the crowdfundings only for people that are involved in them. To me, as example, as I'm involved in the 7C and Cult crowdfundings, it's a very exciting opportunity because 7C, as example, is one of my favorite games ever, and have the opportunity to develop a scenario that has been played by Spanish role-player games. It's a good feeling.
Okay, as Europeans, we have to talk about 7C. I've also read the first edition and ran it, one campaign, so I know the game a bit. So, for example, the fake German country is called Eisen, which is just German for iron. And I think the fake Spain is called Castilla.
Yeah.
So how does that come across in Spain?
The second edition has better acceptance. It's well received by the community than the first one, because in the first one, and John Wick recognized that he's using the idea of Spain and the terms that he thinks that sounds like Spain but are not Spain. Probably the most important example is the man in the mask that is like the Zorro, that in the first edition is called the Vago. John Wick are thinking in vagabond, no, and try to Spanish the word. By vago in Spain, it's a lazy person. This is in the Spanish version, the original translators that are not solo role changed to the vagabonds, and in the second edition, John Wick asked the community about the terms, and the vagabonds is the new version. No? It probably is the funniest example, and I see that some things of the Castilian version of 7C are comic. Like example, the siesta, no? The people spend a lot of time in siesta. But I believe that in each nation, you can see a lot of things like that. And it's part of the funny of the sitting, no? As example, my girlfriend have an adventure that it's more or less like Ocean's 11, but using the siesta time to rob a bank, no? And try to use these ideas to support your narrative, not to get another historically accurate setting.
For the crowdfunding of the World of Darkness 20th anniversary books, you said there are unique scenarios. Can you say what they are about?
We only have the opportunity to do this in Mage and Changeling because in Werewolf and Rite, we don't get so high in the rewards. And in Vampire, the first one, we are very noobs. This is the first crowdfunding of this amount of money that we developed, and it was one of the most successful crowdfundings in Spain ever. In the Mage and Ascension, it's a story settled in Madrid. And I believe that is closer to the Web of Destiny. I believe that is the spell of the first edition of Mage, that is an initial adventure. The creator of the adventure have the same feeling, no? To develop a story about people that are beginning in the Mage setting. And in the Changeling one, it's a story about a community of fates, and it's developed by a Spanish writer. She developed some books of Fae in the literature that is the saga of Nicosia Recorre Túneles. The scenario for Changeling is not based on this setting, but she is very usual, no? Is very familiarized with the Changeling and the Fae and things like that. One thing that we are very happy is that in the crowdfunding editions, as example, Changeling and Mage edition, the extension are probably the best examples. We have the opportunity to develop different editions as in the original one. In Mage, we have the original version, the deluxe version, and a premium version with a box with several materials, the adventure, the Game Master Screams, and even a tarot deck that has been developed with other countries in Europe.
It's not the original tarot deck from the 90s?
No, it's a new version. It's developed, I think that the original initiative was from French, I believe, but they developed a support to print a new edition to different countries.
Okay, that sounds cool. I have to check that out. Coming back to the World of Darkness, was there anything that was difficult to translate, where you were struggling putting that into Spanish?
Yeah, I believe that the trial was the 5th edition to get the flavor of some words, because in the 20th anniversary, we have a lot of terms translated by previous editors, and the Spanish community are very committed with the original terms, and we decided to make minor changes only. In the 5th edition, we had the opportunity to get the flavor of some words. For example, the different kind of blood that you can drink. We try to remove the original Latin words and bring to the Spanish versions and things like that. No? But I didn't say that it's difficult. It's more like an interesting challenge. Back in Game to 7C, as I say, I got a good fan. Some words are in the original English version are less appealing than the Spanish words. For example, you have muscles, músculos in Spain, from the strength. Instead of, say, dexterity or something like that, we use maña, that are you're handy and able to use your hands. That sounds more like the sitting. No? In World of Darkness, we try to do the same, but there are not so many changes because the previous terms are very good for you. They like it.
And you said you're also a writer and translator. So what did you particularly work on?
My work in a solo role involves the opportunity to decide which games we translate. And in some games that I felt comfortable, and if the license allow it, we developed some kind of additional material. No? As example, in Cult, we developed 7 scenarios from the crowdfunding campaign, and I write one of them in collaboration with my colleague Jose Lomo. And it's a scenario about loneless hospital in the middle of the desert of United States with characters that are involved in the plot. It's a good scenario to play in conventions or from one shot and things like that. And in 7C, we have more or less the same idea with a scenario for each developer of No Solo Role. And in this part, I have more or less the coordinator role in the scenarios. And I tried that each one is developed in one of the countries. And I choose Usura, the Russian one, because it's probably the least used in Spanish players, and I think that this is a good opportunity. But my favorite is the new nation in the second edition, that is the Sarmathian Commonwealth, because it's funny, the Polish people developing the rights to all people, and I probably now I develop a scenario there instead of Usura.
Is there anything you would like to add before I stop the recording?
If you are hearing this podcast and you are able to speak in other languages, maybe you know something about our games. As example, some of the games that I talk has been published in German, in Russian, in French, and in Brazil. And some of them, not all of them, are available. No? Search from games translated from No Solo Role in your local editors.
I have to follow up. Do you know which ones are translated into German?
Nameless Cults. I'm sure that this is one because I see the German version. I didn't understand anything, but looks very white. And I didn't know that there another one. I'm more familiarized with the French editions because in French we have Atos Game System, Plenilunio, Black Sand, and others. But in German, at least, Nameless Cults is available.
So thank you for listening to episode 19 of The World of RPGs. The intro music was Battle of the Dragons by Thomas Mutziu, and the logo is by Ayberk Caracas. A special thanks goes out to all my interviewees from Spain that helped bring this together. As always, you can find links to everyone I interviewed with the website, the publishers, actual plays, and much more in the show notes. I'll also include links to those creators and publishers I couldn't get a hold of. For full transparency, I want to say that I did get some Spanish language preview materials from some of the publishers. Considering recommendations, there is another interview with Rodrigo from Other Selves on the Don't Stop Thinking YouTube channel, in which he talks about the Spanish gaming scene in general and also points out influences from Japan and the connections to Latin America. Yes, and I'm definitely planning to cover Latin American countries on this podcast too, once Spain and Portugal have been covered. Please follow and like this podcast on your player of choice or the social media you follow. Episode 20 is next, and it almost feels like a milestone for me, although I think I'll celebrate when I hit 25. You might already guess, we stay on the Iberian Peninsula with the following.
Tem uma coleção dos bocados de reboco que foram caídos da lateral do prédio também, e que ela foi apanhando e que está ali de lado. Tem ao fundo, assim, numa parede, uma bicicleta com 3 lugares que está tipo pousada em cima de um monte de coisas. Vocês veem animais a passar por todo o lado, pássaros a voar. Está um aquário gigantesco de lado onde estão tipo tartarugas, 3 tartarugas a nadar. E é, pronto, é basicamente aquilo que se vê conforme a porta se abre.
Muito bem. Olímpia, a gente é de ir lá abaixo. Vamos lá. Você quer ir descendo as escadas? É para ir lá abaixo ao restaurante que está lá o carteiro, o gato, o Maximiliano.
Maximiliano. Oh, filho, eu vou, mas não me queres dar uma ajudinha?
Eu dou. Eu pego-lhe assim pelo braço, mas eu vou olhando lá para dentro de casa, porque eu quero perceber se ainda há galinhas.
Não vês nenhuma a passar neste momento. Mas eu lancei um stealth check para as galinhas. Calhou-me um natural 20. Portanto, está feito. Não vês nenhuma galinha a passar.
Rata velha, vamos lá.
Então... Senhor Domingos. Senhor Domingos.
Diga, Olímpia.
Por acaso viu o Tropa?
Vi quem?
O Tropa.
Quem é o Tropa?
Senhor Domingos, então a idade também já lhe está a bater, Senhor Domingos.
O Tropa?
É o meu cãozinho, Senhor Domingos. O velhote.
Você pensa que era o Toca?
Não, é o Tropa.
O Tropa?
É que eu acho que já não o vejo já.